Hi, everyone. I'm Michal Wachstock. I'm the head of marketing at Duality. And I want to thank Rand Waldron, Don Schmidt, and Alon Kaufman for joining this webinar, Sovereignty Without Isolation, Collaboration Without Exposure. Maybe we'll start with you, Rand, if you could just give us a quick intro, what you're doing in Oracle and how that touches our topic.
Absolutely. Obviously, my name is Rand Waldron. I'm the Vice President of Sovereign Regions here at Oracle. So I'm responsible for the product management, strategy, engineering, and operations of our sovereign regions globally. I focus in on our most complex customers who have the biggest security concerns around the world and build the products they need to be able to become fully modern and fully agentic into the future. Long career at the FBI before Oracle and startups and venture capital before that.
Great. Thanks so much. And how about you, Don?
Don Schmidt. I'm a managing director with Deloitte Consulting. Much like Rand, spent a lot of time talking to clients in our global markets around how to implement various technologies, specifically around the Oracle stack, around data sovereignty, and really trying to take the conversation from just moving from how do we restrict, but how do we securely enable these technologies so that our clients can take on the innovation that they're looking to take on.
Great, thanks so much. And Alon.
Definitely. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining. Alon Kaufman, obviously, the co-founder and the CEO of Duality Technologies. I actually come from a data background, utilizing data to solve business problems. And the reason or mission behind the founding of Duality is really to address one of the critical challenges today in this world of data, which is true for any organization, small companies, nations, enterprises. And that's the challenge of, on one hand, you want to control your assets, namely data, make sure that you have full control over who's accessing, what's accessing, and using them. But at the same time, you want to leverage and collaborate with third parties that can help you create more value out of their data. So there's this kind of inherent challenge of locking down your data on one hand versus opening up in order to be competitive and innovate. And the whole idea behind Duality is really like the topic of this webinar. How can you maintain sovereignty without isolation? But at the same time, how can you collaborate on data and on models without really exposing yourself to the data in the models? And excited to be here and to have the discussion with our partners at Oracle and Deloitte.
Yeah. So I am going to take the reins and hope that Melanie can join when she can. I guess where this conversation meets us is really how organizations should be thinking about sovereignty at all. And what should it be meaning to them? How are different types of organizations thinking about sovereignty? I don't know which one of you want to take it first. Maybe we can start in the same order. Rand, what are your thoughts about how organizations in today's day and age should be thinking about sovereignty?
I'll start with right now, demand for sovereignty is infinite. I don't want to say every customer, but every customer I talk to is concerned about sovereignty, about different levels of sovereignty, about how to control their data, their citizen data, their critical elements. I will say that we talk to customers and we try to get them to think about sovereignty in multiple layers and in practical terms about what it is that they need to control, what it is that they are trying to deliver for their end customers, because it's very easy for sovereignty to be an emotional discussion rather than a practical discussion. I build things. I'm literally the guy that builds the thing. And so for me, we work with our customers to find what are the practical solutions to their sovereignty concerns.
Maybe to add just a little bit onto what Rand was saying. Obviously, we're clearly in the era of AI models and the data feeding those models. Our clients, our customers' most critical assets. It's certainly seen to be that. I think organizations need to view sovereignty not just on the data residency aspects, but the totality of sovereignty. And obviously, sovereignty means a lot of things. It means different things for each organization. But looking at the entire stack of control from operations and the technical side of things, and then data, of course, is very important as well.
Point of view, how we see it at Duality, it's really, sovereignty has been around for many years. And usually it was all around really making sure that your data is in your control and where it is in terms of data residency. In recent years, I think what's actually causing the rise of this whole challenge around sovereignty is, one, everyone is understanding that just the data residency is only one part of the story, and it's a much more complex story. And sovereignty has moved from being, I would say, a compliance checkbox kind of thing to a much deeper strategy, and talking about how do you really control not only the data, but the outputs of the data, the usage of the data, where it runs, in what conditions it runs, what are the legal applications, and so on. And asking ourselves, so what actually caused this change? I think it's really what Don and Rand were relating to. The value of data itself has really changed. In order to get insights and value out of data, in the past, you had to have good data, have researchers sit on it and or investigators analyze it. We're in a world where we want to leverage AI. You need to leverage AI. The minute you say that, you need additional tools that are not necessarily in the control of the data owner, and you need the right infrastructure to do it. So we'll talk today about OCI solution, which allows you to control your data, your model, and your infrastructure. But even if you do that, you're still locked in your kind of own bubble. And the question is, okay, how do you maintain this control and at the same time innovate and compete against the rest of the world, which requires you basically or to use models that are not in your control and use third-party models, or use infrastructure that may not be in your control. And so the whole concept of sovereignty is moving to a strategic discussion around control and resilience, not just where your data is, but how you're using it, for what are you using it, with what tools are you using it, what is the value of what's coming out, and so on. And it's becoming a much more robust and interesting discussion than in previous years.
I will say that from an Oracle perspective, we work with customers to create sovereignty that has three layers. Alon talked about legal aspects. So we have the legal sovereignty and structures. We have the physical aspects around that data residency. Where is the data actually stored? And we have the human aspects. Who can actually touch the data and operate those physical environments? And so you can create a spectrum along all three of those environments. But it is really important to note, as we're talking, like not every single resource you're going to want to interact with sits inside that environment. You're going to want to interact outside of that environment with other resources, and creating that environment that fits your sovereignty allows a lot of partners, a lot of other entities to work in it, allows us to bring our AI capabilities, all of those things, but it doesn't bring every capability on Earth into that environment. So you've got to be able to interact in and out of those sovereign environments.
What do we think has changed, either technologically or geopolitically or both, that makes this topic so urgent right now that, as you said, Rand, it's endless?
At the risk of like just foot stomping everything that Alon says, two things have happened. One is critical, and that is that every nation state, as well as critical infrastructure company, with a very broad definition of what critical infrastructure is, everything from healthcare to anybody who stores citizen data to financial. So every nation state and every large critical company has realized how important data is. Data is no longer a sideline to your business. It's no longer a sideline to your national security. 10 or 15 years ago at the FBI, data was just a thing that we did to try to do investigations better. It is now everything. And so all of these companies have realized that, all of these nation states have realized that, and therefore data needs to be protected the way critical infrastructure used to be protected, or the way combat systems used to be protected. Now data needs to be protected in the exact same way. That's thing one. And thing two, I think everybody has realized that the world is simply more volatile than they thought. We have not reached the end of history. If you go back to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, if you look at all the other things happening in the world, everybody now realizes that this is a complex world. We have not reached a permanent era of good feelings and simplicity. And therefore, when you have critical assets like data, you need to protect it in a way that people hoped was gone maybe 10 years ago. That era isn't gone. And so you combine those two things, data is a critical asset, like critical infrastructure or like a weapon system, and the world is volatile. Sovereignty is at the top of everyone's mind.
I'll ask you, at the end of the day, you described very well how the data is like the critical asset where everyone has to protect, and that's like the core. The outcome, which is what you do with the data, needs these two extra things, which is how do you model it, which used to be more human intensive, and now it's becoming AI driven.
Yep.
And because of this AI driven world, we know that you need very strong infrastructure today. So when you put the sovereign boundaries around it, would you include the models itself and the infrastructure in your sovereign concept as well?
Yeah, I would. And I think that there's continuously a spectrum. So you may not need every single model or every single thing that your organization is doing, but absolutely. So the core infrastructure, whether it be the IaaS and PaaS, the infrastructure as a service and the platform, as well as the actual physical hardware. In the case of models, the GPUs that are doing your inference, those do need to be controlled in a sovereign manner, as well as instantiations of the model brought into that environment. The model providers will all do this, and that model can actually run in your environment. Again, I think the analogy to critical infrastructure is a good one. You wouldn't want your country to be 100% dependent upon electricity from another country. You've got to have some generation yourself, some capability to do this yourself. AI is going to be through every single aspect of our economy. If all of that is running 100% in another country, in another environment, then you are dependent upon that for your entire economic performance. So I do believe you've got to bring the infrastructure and the models into the environment, and you can interact absolutely outside of that environment, interact with data outside that environment. But what you're doing with that data, how you're operating on that data, should stay local, should stay sovereign.
Yeah, that's exactly what we've seen from our side. And I would just say that the geopolitical situation and the sovereignty of the data and models that Rand expressed are actually what's creating, in a simplistic way, the walls, making sure that we have the walls around these environments. And you definitely need it because you can't be totally dependent on third parties. But at the same time, we live in a world that in order to compete, if you build too many walls around you, you are at a disadvantage. Just to make it a little bit more concrete, we all know that fighting financial crime, a cross-border challenge. So if every country kind of locks itself down, it's very hard to fight against financial crime. Healthcare is another example where definitely in cases of rare diseases or pandemics, you want to have some kind of collaboration between the nations. So I think it's not either or, it's a continuum. Having the right walls or having the right sovereign systems like Oracle builds is a critical basic step. But then you still have to have, if those are the walls, you still have to have the doors to get through it while maintaining the sovereignty. Also, if you go and use electricity in a third party country, or if you use a model of a third party, you still have to make sure that you have a sovereign way to make sure that the data of the model stays protected. And I think thinking this way is what really the world has to do, going from the simple data residency challenge to this, how do you really compete and innovate in this world? Sorry, Melanie, thanks for joining.
I am so sorry. All I can say is the Wi-Fi here in Chelsea Football Club at Stamford Bridge, it's where I'm talking to you from, was not happy about letting me onto this call, sent me for a little bit of a loop. But thank you for your patience.
Let me just say, Melanie, we've done the introductions. We've basically gone over what the definition of sovereignty is, what the major challenges, and we were about to go deeper into what the challenges of data sharing are. So I'll let you take it from here, and I will step out.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Michal. Again, my apologies for everybody listening. I learned you were talking about this sort of real challenge of thinking, is total like sovereign AI strategy possible. And you began to allude to what begins to break when teams try and collaborate on sensitive data in traditional approaches. And so I'd love to put that up to think about it. Where do you, across through all of you, where is the friction that comes in when you begin to try to use traditional approaches for sensitive?
I think let's just define a second what is the classical way of sharing data and working on data in a collaborative way today. So the way doing it today is basically that at the end of the day, one or both parties have to bring the data to one kind of central location. That's how it's done today. In order to do that, the different organizations that share the data have to, of course, comply with all the regulations and privacy laws, but there's also a lot of data agreements that have to be signed. And at the end of the day, if you really think about it, it's a trust model. If two entities are sharing data and moving data from one to another, even if they have all the nice agreements around them, you're basically trusting that the third party is treating your data the right way. And by the way, even if it's treating your data the right way, they can also be attacked. So if I'm collaborating with someone and giving them my assets, my data, I'm basically trusting them. And that's how the world basically works, but it's very hard to do. It takes a long time. There's always pockets of data that you cannot trust. And then there's different challenges which are rightly so set by governments around regulations and so on. So that's how the classical way of doing it. We now just getting, and Melanie, we haven't spoke about this yet, but there's a new set of technologies that are called privacy enhancing technologies that change this paradigm. That you do not necessarily have to move data to a central place. You can keep your data where it is and analyze it in a federated way where your data never moves, so that you maintain your control on the data and still collaborate. And there's another set of technologies which allows you to analyze data while it's encrypted and protected. And that also removes this need for me to trust the third party. If the data stays encrypted during the analysis, the two parties or more have to agree what's going to be done, how we're going to use the insights. There's a lot of agreements, but the actual data stays protected, which makes it much easier to get through these data agreements and practically also meet regulations. So this whole concept that data sharing doesn't mean that you're exposing your data. With these new technologies, it means you can work with third parties to drive insights out of your data. That's the big paradigm shift that we're talking about. And at the end of the day, if you translate it to business, it's quicker, it's less risky, and you get more value because you're collaborating and using more data.
And thank you for that, Alana. I'd like to go to Rand and John, just talk a little bit about, from your perspectives, how have you found that these classification levels or national borders have created barriers in your industry for insight? Or where have you seen real tangible examples of not using these kind of approaches that are available or impacting mission outcomes for organizations?
Yeah, Don, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. I think we obviously talked about a little bit of data is really a critical asset. And I think it further it expands itself upon the models are only going to be good as the data is trained on. And having all that data, but having the right data, the correct data, clean data. And it's something we've talked about for decades around data being clean, because garbage in, garbage out, and the whole data classification concerns and concepts right there are really further important in this AI world.
Rand, do you want to add anything into that?
Yeah, I would put it a slightly different way. And that is that you can look at different classification rules as a set of restrictions that constrain what you can do. You can look at those data classification rules as like the bars on a prison cell, or you can look at that restrain you and keep you locked in, or you can look at them as like a jungle gym and a playground, something you can actually use to be able to move around and actually get things done. And so here's what I would say. When you create the right structures around data classification, you can actually create sovereign environments that reflect those data classifications. And then inside that known to be secure environment, you can have a tremendous amount of collaboration and data sharing. And that alone would be a huge transcendent step for most governments and most entities, where even where things are conceptually at the same data classification level, they do not allow sharing. And then we can, between those levels, and I do this with customers today, where they have multiple sovereign environments, between those levels, you can have collaboration, you can move data, you can use tooling like dualities to make sure that you can reach data, you can interact with data without revealing what is being done with that data or who is interacting with that data. And there are real ways to look at those classification structures, not as things that lock you in, but as things that allow you to do the work you need to do. You have to understand what can be done inside them, how you work across them. But to me, I truly do not see them as constraints. I see them as areas that we can build Oracle, we can build infrastructure, tooling, operations, legal structures that help you interact in that environment. We can work with partners like Duality to interact across those environments. So don't see them as constraints, see them as the way to drive the interactions you need.
I will no longer see them constraints. I will never now be able to visualize this without seeing a slide with a ball pit at the bottom of it.
Exactly.
And those things to hop between. I love
exactly
the analogy.
How I see classified data. Yes.
Classified data. We're just hopping between different things. We're standing on those spinny things, and we hopefully end up somewhere. Love it. So Rand alluded to where sort of duality and PETs come into this picture a little bit, and you've talked about what they are. Alon, what do you find the biggest misconception is when people are using or thinking about integrating PETs into this picture?
Yes, thanks. So PETs, of course, privacy enhancing technologies. These are a set of technologies that basically allow you to move from the simple paradigm of exposing if you want to share data, or locking up, isolating if you don't want to share. These technologies that allow a continuum of working in a collaborative setting without the need to expose or share your data, like Rand said. So that's what the PETs are. The main challenge that most organizations express and when we come and solve these problems for them are mainly two things. One, these are complex technologies, so some organizations are afraid for them, and the others think that this will slow them down. So these are like the two main things. Now, in reality, as always, feelings have a source of truth. They are complex technologies, and going back several years, they were harder to manipulate and also slower to work them. But there's been a huge transition in the recent years. And I can just give everyone an analogy. If we were doing e-commerce, 40 years ago, we were all concerned that, hey, we're too nervous to do e-commerce because if I give someone my credit card number over the phone, they'll steal their credit card and so on. So yeah, people were doing e-commerce, but they were nervous and it wasn't very common. The minute in that case, PayPal took it and found a way to do these transactions in an encrypted and secure way, it basically opened up the ability to do e-commerce, because now you can pay with your credit card, but being ensured that your credit card details are not leaking. And that's actually what's happened with PETs in this world of data sharing in the recent years. Systems have come with these PETs built in, so it makes for the user a seamless integration. So if we take Rand's example, if I'm an investigator and I want to expose and want to analyze third-party data without disclosing what I'm looking for, you can write the same queries like you typically do, just making sure that they're protected by these technologies. And so the seamless angle of it has been done. And then in terms of performance, there's a lot of the advances being done, both with the leading cloud providers and hyperscalers, as well as with other algorithms and technologies. So I think these are like the main things that have changed. I think there's also been always a question, what is the right PET? What is the right privacy technology to use? And this ties in also to the, there's not one silver bullet that solves everything. And especially also the classification level that we spoke about before can also solve it. Because not every problem has the same solution. Some of these privacy technologies allow you to analyze the data and keep it wherever it is. Some of them allow you to run it within trusted execution environments and protected by hardware. Some allow you, like homomorphic encryption, to protect it by software. So there's not one PET that solves it all. They're much easier to use today than before. And in terms of runtime and slowdown, there's been dramatic advancements that have made it basically scalable to have any level that you want today.
With that in mind, we talked a little bit about sovereignty. We've talked about the great jungle gym, and we talked about potential solution spaces. Going back to bringing all this together, how can this sort of, but the purpose of this, a function of this is for innovation, the function of this is to keep moving forward. Can all this, is this a solution? Can this all be brought into the sense of control, the sense of trusted control within sovereign or classified environments? So can it all be brought together without compromising control? Don, Rand, what are your thoughts on that?
Rand, I'll let you start from an Oracle perspective on the solutions you have, and I can add in.
Can't say yes strongly enough. Absolutely. The entire intent of what I have built and what we have been focusing our research and development on here in Oracle is on eliminating that set of perceived compromises, on the idea that if you're going to do sovereignty, then you lose all of these other things. You lose your best services, you pay higher prices. And so this concept that a lot of the other hyperscalers bring forth is that, hey, there's a trade-off. You can have more sovereignty, but then you lose all of these other capabilities. And by the way, you pay more as well. And that is the exact opposite of what we have tried to build, what we have built with our customers, and what we are operating today. The reality is it does take thought. It has taken a tremendous amount of research and development by Oracle, collaboration with partners like Deloitte, work that Alon and his team do, but it is absolutely doable. And it is absolutely within our grasp, within our customers' grasp. And frankly, we're doing this every day. We have sovereign environments in Japan, in the UK, in the EU, in the United States. We have different levels of sovereignty. We have fully classified air-gapped environments that still interact with each other across air gaps. We have all sorts of different deployment models live today at hyperscale, running all of our cloud services, running partners, and interacting with each other. And so the perceived trade-off of, yes, you can gain sovereignty, but you have to lose all of these other things, it's just not the case.
I think one piece to probably add on to that, because as you said, Brand, all the services are available in your public clouds, are available in the other deployments for sovereignty, but also there's no delay by which those services are available or enhancements to those services that will continue to roll out. They roll out the same time frame as they do with your public cloud, as they do with your sovereign solutions.
Absolutely.
If I may add on top, we're talking about innovation. So what is innovation at the end of the day? It's speed and really the ability to work and utilize third-party tools. I think what Oracle has built here basically removes this barrier between enterprise and standard commercial use cases and national sovereign use cases. If I can build the exact same application and serve my non-sovereign customers and move it to the Oracle with no cost, that of course encourages more usage, more development, and so on, and the speed of transition. So that's one thing. At the same time, these environments are evolving, and Oracle has one that very easily a third-party entity can put their protected models within this environment. So for them, it's much easier. They have a bigger TAM, they have an interest, and if they don't have to redevelop it, it accelerates it. So at the end of the day, innovation to me is really speed and working with the best of breeds. And this is what these concepts are allowing now, which is true. Many years ago, several years ago, that was not the case. It was separate environments. You had to build dedicated software for sovereign environments. You couldn't utilize third-party companies because everyone was concerned about their IP. And I think that's what's really changed this world and made it innovative at the same time with sovereignty built in.
This is critical, and this goes back, unfortunately, to the jungle gym analogy.
I liked it.
You cannot look at the demand for sovereignty as a set of constraints that make it more difficult to do business for a third-party company, or make it more difficult to accomplish your mission as a company or as a nation state. You really look at it the opposite. Alon said it. For a third-party company, we actually can help you expand your TAM. because it is relatively easy. We have the exact same infrastructure in our commercial cloud as in our sovereign environments. So you can build once and deploy many, up adding to your TAM with every single one of those sovereign deployments. You can work with partners because partners are doing that as well. And so what this allows is companies to grow their TAMs and customers to grow the capabilities that are available to them and not feel like they're pushed away from their citizens' sovereignty demands or their national security sovereign demands. So really, it isn't a blocker. You can see it as a constraint that drives innovation. It is how we can grow and be better in the future.
From a Deloitte perspective, in addition to that, similar to what Ellen said as well, where Deloitte or other SIs or other ISVs, where we're able to build products for commercial clients, we can take those same and deploy those for sovereign clients as well, because it is the same stack from an Oracle perspective.
So it's really this sort of compartmentalization, but I thought of that analogy of like it build once, deploy many, and be able to have that opportunity to accelerate innovation within an ecosystem. I want to pivot this slightly to thinking about how do we look at this from the perspective of security and resilience? How do these approaches help? We've talked about the sort of sense of security and sense of dealing with sensitive data and those level of protection. But how do these models overall help resilience for organizations as they're building?
Don, you want to go first?
Sure. I think no different than whether it be on-prem or in a public cloud perspective, building resiliency into any of the solutions, whether it be sovereign or not, is top of mind. And when Deloitte comes in, that is a lot of what we do at the beginning of our engagements is really focus on security and resiliency to ensure that the data is protected, it's secure, it's safe. So that as we build solutions on these sovereign cloud solutions, that is really from a first mover perspective, that's the first thing we always are focused on.
Yeah, I would say that we work with all to create the resiliency they need. Obviously, in many cases, we can deploy 2 regions. That's what we recommend, in fact, for critical activities. We have automatic replication and things that make failover very easy. A lot of our core SaaS technologies manage that sort of failover and resilience for you. The reality is very rarely are you using your sovereign infrastructure to serve up cat videos. You're using your sovereign infrastructure to do things that are really important for your national security, for your critical infrastructure, for other critical activities. Build with resilience in mind. That's how we build, and we'll do it with you.
Alon, do you have anything to add there?
I want to add like another layer onto this resilience, and obviously on top of what Don and Rand said, just imagine that the data and all the models are encrypted at all times, and the user keeps the keys. This increases your resilience dramatically, because now you're not exposed, even if in cases of leakage, you can easily move from one place to another. You have full control on what data is used and how it's used. So it opens up a whole new dimension in this world of resilience. And at the end of the day, resilience is really part of this puzzle of how do you maintain sovereignty and like the different knobs and so on. And the pets are now another layer.
I get this final question to all of you, and to the extent that I'm thinking a little bit about the future of data ecosystems. We often look at what we're doing within the world we're in, but sometimes have to think about what is the world that we're actually building for. So 5 years from now, do you think that any of the approaches that we're sitting in right now will be outdated? How do you envision this model holding true? Do you think it's going to evolve in a different way? If so, how do you think leaders should be preparing for that right now?
Yeah, I will say only fools predict 5 years from now, right now in the technology world. I will say, looking forward, I can only see the demand for these sorts of sovereign capabilities at many layers, at the legal layer, at the physical layer, at the human and data interaction layer. I can only see demand for that growing. There is almost no chance that in the next 5 years, we take a step back from the need for sovereignty. It's just not going to happen. And so I can see solutions evolving and getting better and transforming into ways of delivering sovereignty that are beyond what we've imagined, that are better, faster, bigger, but I cannot see the need for sovereignty diminishing. And so what that means is that as Oracle, we will keep innovating in this direction. It's a huge part of our research and development. Partners like Duality and Deloitte will be in that with us, because the need and the demand for this is only going to grow.
Done?
I could not disagree anymore. And as Rand said, hard to predict what things might look like in 5 years from now in this technology era. I think the other piece I would add to what Rand said is really how that evolves into adopting this distributed cloud strategy and how organizations and leaders look at that.
And Nilan?
I'm willing to try and be the fool in the room. I don't know if it's 5 years or not, but if I try and think where this is going, again, from the duality angle, I think the concept of sovereignty will be way beyond data. It's going to be also talking about the models, the insights, the what you do, and so on. So it's going to expand in terms of what is covered in this umbrella. But moreover, I don't think the world is going to be talking about data sharing very much. I think the world is going to be talking about insight sharing and knowledge sharing. The data is becoming, as strong as and important it is, the data with this world of AI is just becoming a means to an end. And we'll always have to protect data, but the essence will be not on the data itself, it's what we're deriving from it. And making sure that what we're deriving from it is according to the sovereignty rules we have, regulatory rules we have, geopolitical considerations, and so on. So there will be a shift from data sharing to insight sharing, and the world will be talking about really what insights and what knowledge are we collaborating on versus the raw data that we see today.
Yeah, I agree with Alon in terms of, I'll join him in the pit of fools. Absolutely. I think that it will turn more into what are we extracting from that data and how are we operating against the data. I'll add another layer. I keep talking about, I'll just put it on myself, I keep talking about sovereignty in the context of critical infrastructure and national security. I also think that's going to totally transform as all of us, I'm wearing AirPods right now, as all of us have AI agents interacting with us all day. So over the next 5 years, these AirPods or something like it are going to have LLMs that have infinite context on me. They know exactly what's going on. I will interact with them as if they are friends, as if they are coworkers, and I will be asking them to do things, whether it be book my personal travel or do a particular thing at work. And this will permeate our daily lives, both our home life and our work life. No connection to critical infrastructure, no connection to national security necessarily, but I think there are many citizens that will not be comfortable with what I just described as part of their minute-to-minute interactions running in some foreign country they can't identify. So I believe that if this sort of compute and AI is going to permeate daily life this deeply, I think people are going to demand that actually happens near them in a way that they understand, in a way that they perceive as sovereign, and in a way that is controlled within the legal boundaries of their nation state, such that if it's misused, their law enforcement agencies can actually do something about it rather than somewhere else. So I truly think the discussion about sovereignty is going to transition from critical infrastructure and national security to every aspect of our daily lives, because people are going to want those things controlled under the laws of their nation state so that misuse can actually be addressed rather than handled globally so that misuse cannot be addressed.
Thank you for that. And I love it. It's a thought to my own heart. It's not just thinking about how we're looking at this tech, but how that convergence space, and definitely that point of where we're getting that convergence into that cognitive space. But it's really valuable thinking about where this is going to shift into as we're looking into this knowledge in insight space. So governing end products, governing outputs, more thinking about how technology will converge, how that will shift actually this demand for where this output may be housed, and so much more to explore there. So I think that's definitely the next step conversation of thinking about where these systems sit within a converged space of embodied AI, of technology, as we have it in the clouds as we know it, and how we're going to use it. I want to thank you all so much. So thank you so much, Rand, John, and Alon, for another fantastic webinar, and I hope we get to convene again soon.
Thank you very much. Great conversation.
Have a good day, everyone. And thank you.